The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Williams, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1883, and Adelaide Preston stood outside the barber shop with her thick auburn hair unbound for the last time, her fingers trembling as she reached for the door handle, knowing that once she sold the only thing of value she possessed, there would be nothing left of the girl she used to be. She had been standing there for nearly 10 minutes, working up the courage to walk inside. The barber had already looked at her twice through the window, his expression a mixture of pity and business interest. Adelaide knew what she must look like. A 21-year-old woman in a faded calico dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches, her face gaunt from weeks of rationing what little food she could afford, her boots so worn that she could feel every pebble through the thin soles. Her father had died 3 months ago, kicked by a horse he had been trying to shoe. The doctor bills had taken everything they had saved, and then the landlord had come for the rent on their small room above the general store. Adelaide had worked as a seamstress, but when Mrs. Thornton had closed her dress shop and moved back east to live with her daughter, the work had dried up completely. She had tried everything, knocking on every door in Williams, offering to cook, clean, wash laundry, anything honest that would keep her fed and sheltered. But the town was small, and most families did their own work or already had help they could afford. The hair buyer came through Williams once a month, and the barber acted as his agent. Adelaide had heard whispers about it from other desperate women, how they could get anywhere from $5 to $15 depending on the length and quality. Her hair reached past her waist, thick and shining even though she had not been eating well. It was the one thing her mother had always praised, back before the fever took her when Adelaide was 12. She could still hear her mother's voice, telling her that her hair was her glory, that she should treasure it. But glory did not fill an empty stomach or pay for a roof over her head. Adelaide finally pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed above her head. The barber looked up from the newspaper he had been reading, folding it carefully and setting it aside. He was a rotund man with a handlebar mustache and kind eyes that had seen too much hardship in this frontier town. "Miss Preston," he said quietly, and she appreciated that he did not make her say it first. "I need to sell my hair, Mr. Jacobson," Adelaide said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. "When does the buyer come through next? He was here yesterday, miss." "But he will be back in a month." A month. Adelaide felt her knees weaken. She did not have a month. She had until tomorrow to pay what she owed for her room, or she would be on the street. The territory was no place for a woman alone with no money and no shelter. She had heard stories about what happened to women in those circumstances, stories that made her blood run cold. "I see," she whispered. "Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, defeat washing over her like a cold wave, when the door opened behind her, and she nearly collided with a broad chest covered in a dust-covered shirt. She stumbled back, and strong hands caught her arms, steadying her. "Careful there, madam," a deep voice said, and Adelaide looked up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a worn cowboy hat. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes despite the serious expression he wore. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, sturdy denim pants, scuffed boots with spurs, and a leather vest over his shirt. A bandana hung loosely around his neck, and she could see the outline of a pistol at his hip. "I apologize," Adelaide said quickly, stepping back from his touch even though some traitorous part of her had found comfort in the steadiness of his grip. "I was not watching where I was going." "No harm done," the cowboy said, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Are you all right, miss? You look a bit pale." "I am fine, thank you," Adelaide lied, moving toward the door, but the cowboy did not move aside. Instead, he glanced past her to Mr. Jacobson, then back to her face, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. "You were here to sell your hair." It was not a question, and Adelaide felt her cheeks burn with shame. "My circumstances are my own business, sir. Please let me pass." "Xavier Wallace, madam," he said, introducing himself but still not moving. "And I reckon when I see a woman about to do something that is clearly breaking her heart, it becomes my business to at least try to help." "I do not need charity," Adelaide said, lifting her chin even as tears finally spilled over and ran down her cheeks. She hated that she was crying in front of this stranger, hated the weakness it showed, but she could not seem to stop. Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. "Not charity, miss, just common decency between neighbors. We are not neighbors. I have never seen you before in my life. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch about 15 miles north of here. I am in town picking up supplies." He paused and his voice softened. "And I reckon if we are both standing in Williams on a Tuesday afternoon, that makes us neighbors enough." Despite everything, Adelaide felt a small laugh escape her throat, though it sounded more like a sob. She took the handkerchief and pressed it to her eyes, trying to regain her composure. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Wallace, but there is nothing you can do to help me, unless you are in the market to buy hair yourself." "What I am in the market for is a housekeeper and cook," Xavier said, and Adelaide's eyes snapped to his face. "The ranch owner, Mr. Donovan, his wife passed 6 months ago and the place has been falling apart ever since. The hands are good with cattle and horses, but we are living on burnt beans and dust. The house needs a woman's touch, proper meals, mending, that sort of thing. It would come with room and board and $30 a month." Adelaide stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. $30 a month was more than she had made as a seamstress, and room and board meant she would not have to worry about rent or food. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "Why would you offer this to a complete stranger?" she asked suspiciously. "You know nothing about me. I could be a terrible cook. I could be a thief." "Are you a thief?" "No. Can you cook better than what we have been eating?" "I have never had anyone complain about my cooking," Adelaide admitted. "Then that settles it," Xavier said. "You need work, we need help." "Seems like Providence to me. Mr. Wallace, I appreciate the offer, but I cannot just ride off with a strange man to a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Surely you can understand how that would look." Xavier nodded slowly. "You are right, and I apologize for not thinking of your reputation. How about this? We go see Reverend Matthews right now. He knows Mr. Donovan, knows the ranch is reputable. He can vouch for us, and if you want, his wife could ride out with us so you would have a chaperone until you are settled." Adelaide wanted to say no. Every ounce of pride she had left wanted to refuse this offer, to find her own way without accepting help from this blue-eyed cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere like something from a dime novel. But pride would not keep her alive. Pride would not keep her off the streets. "All right," she said finally. "We can talk to the Reverend." Xavier smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Good. Come on, the church is just down the street." As they walked together through the dusty streets of Williams, Adelaide was acutely aware of the curious glances from the townspeople they passed. Xavier walked with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and did not care much what others thought of him. He kept his stride measured to match hers, and when a wagon rolled past too quickly, kicking up a cloud of dust, He moved to place himself between her and the street. The church was a simple white building with a wooden cross above the door. Reverend Matthews was in the small garden beside it, tending to a patch of vegetables that looked like they were struggling in the Arizona heat. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent serving frontier communities. "Xavier Wallace," the Reverend said, straightening up and wiping his hands on his pants. "Did not expect to see you in town on a weekday. Everything all right at the ranch?" "Yes, sir, Reverend. Just picking up supplies, but I have a proposition and I wanted to run it by you first." Xavier explained the situation quickly, leaving out the part about Adelaide nearly selling her hair, but making it clear that she needed work, and the ranch needed help. Reverend Matthews listened carefully, his eyes moving between Xavier and Adelaide with the assessing gaze of a man used to reading people and situations. When Xavier finished, the Reverend was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Preston, your father was a good man. I was sorry to hear of his passing. He spoke of you often, always with great pride." The Reverend's voice was gentle, and Adelaide felt fresh tears threaten. "The Triple Bar is a respectable operation. Thomas Donovan is a fair man, a bit lost since Mary died, but he treats his workers well. Xavier here is his foreman, has been for 3 years now. I would not hesitate to recommend this arrangement, and I think Martha would be happy to ride out with you if that would make you more comfortable." Adelaide felt a weight lift from her chest. "Thank you, Reverend. That would ease my mind considerably. When would you want to leave?" Reverend Matthews asked Xavier. "Tomorrow morning, if Miss Preston is agreeable. That would give her time to gather her things and say her goodbyes and give Martha time to prepare for a few days away." "Tomorrow," Adelaide repeated. It seemed impossibly fast, and yet she had nowhere else to go and no other options. Yes, tomorrow would be fine. They worked out the details, and then Adelaide found herself walking back toward the general store with Xavier beside her, the late afternoon sun beginning to cast long shadows across the street. She felt like she was in a dream, like none of this could possibly be real. "Thank you," she said softly as they reached the building where she rented her room. "I do not understand why you are doing this for me, but thank you." Xavier stopped and turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "Back in that barber shop, when you were about to sell your hair, I could see it was not just about the money. It was like you were preparing to give up a piece of yourself because you thought that was all you had left of value. But Miss Preston, a person is not valuable because of one thing they can sell. You are more than your hair, more than your current circumstances. I reckon if more people understood that about each other, this world would be a kinder place." Adelaide felt her breath catch in her throat. No one had spoken to her like that in so long, like she mattered as a whole person rather than just as a burden or a problem to be solved. "How do you know I am worth all that faith you seem to have in me?" "I do not yet," Xavier admitted, "but I am willing to find out." "Are you?" She thought about it, really thought about what he was offering beyond just the job. He was offering her a chance to prove to herself that she was more than the desperate woman who had been about to sell her hair, a chance to rebuild, to find solid ground again. "Yes," Adelaide said. "I am willing to find out." Xavier touched the brim of his hat in farewell. "I will be here at dawn with the wagon. We will stop for Mrs. Matthews and then head to the ranch. It is about a 3-hour drive, so dress comfortable." After he left, Adelaide climbed the narrow stairs to her room and sat on the edge of her small bed, looking around at the tiny space that had been her home for the last 2 years. There was not much to pack. Her clothes fit in a single carpet bag, along with her mother's Bible, her father's pocket watch, and a few other small treasures. She would have to tell Mrs. Henderson at the general store that she was leaving, settle her account for the room. That night, Adelaide barely slept. She kept turning Xavier's words over in her mind, trying to understand this man who had walked into her life at exactly the moment she needed saving, and had offered her not charity but opportunity. She wondered what the ranch would be like, what Mr. Donovan would be like, whether she would be able to do the job well enough to earn her keep. But mostly she thought about the way Xavier had looked at her, like he saw past the worn dress and the hollow cheeks and the desperation, and saw something worth valuing. When dawn came, Adelaide was already dressed and waiting on the street with her carpet bag. The town was just beginning to wake up, smoke rising from chimneys as people started their breakfast fires. She had settled her account with Mrs. Henderson, who had been kind about it, even refunding her a few dollars since Adelaide was leaving earlier than expected. Xavier arrived exactly when he said he would, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses. He climbed down to help her up to the seat, his hand strong and steady as she settled herself. Her carpet bag went in the back with what looked like supplies from the general store, sacks of flour and sugar, beans and coffee, various tools and hardware. They picked up Mrs. Matthews, a plump woman with gray hair and a warm smile who immediately put Adelaide at ease with her cheerful chatter about the weather and her garden, and the new family that had just moved into a homestead north of town. She sat between Adelaide and Xavier on the wagon seat, proper and respectable, though Adelaide noticed the older woman kept giving them both thoughtful looks when she thought they were not paying attention. The ride to the Triple Bar Ranch took them north out of Williams, following a rutted road through high desert country dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. The morning air was cool and fresh, though Adelaide knew it would heat up quickly once the sun rose higher. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy, and overhead the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. Xavier drove with easy competence, handling the horses and the rough road with the skill of someone who had been doing it his whole life. He pointed out landmarks along the way, a distinctive rock formation, the place where a spring created a small oasis, the boundary markers for the ranch land. The Triple Bar has about 10,000 acres, he explained. Mr. Donovan runs cattle mostly, some horses. We have about 8 hands regular, more during roundup and branding season. The ranch house is good-sized, built when Mr. Donovan first came here 15 years ago. There is a bunkhouse for the hands, a barn, corrals, the usual outbuildings. How long have you been working there? Adelaide asked. 5 years total, 3 as foreman. I came west from Missouri after the war, did some drifting, worked various ranches. Mr. Donovan gave me a chance when I needed one, taught me a lot about running cattle in this country. He is a good man, just been having a hard time since Mrs. Donovan passed. They did not have children, so it has just been him and us hands, and none of us are much good at keeping house. Mrs. Matthews laughed. That is the truth. I visited a few weeks ago to bring some preserves, and the state of that kitchen nearly made me cry. Dishes piled everywhere, floor that had not been swept properly in months, dust on every surface. Poor Thomas looked so embarrassed. We do our best, Xavier said, but there was a note of humor in his voice. But I will admit domestic matters are not our strong suit. They crested a rise and Xavier pointed ahead. There it is, the Triple Bar. Adelaide looked where he indicated and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. The ranch house was indeed good-sized, a 2-story structure built of wood with a wide porch wrapping around at least 2 sides. It had been painted white once, though the paint was weathered and peeling in places. Nearby stood a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a long, low structure that must be the bunkhouse. Corrals fanned out from the barn, and Adelaide could see horses and cattle dotting the landscape beyond. As they drew closer, several men came out of the barn, stopping their work to watch the wagon approach. Xavier pulled the horses to a stop in front of the ranch house, and a man emerged from inside, wiping his hands on a towel. Thomas Donovan was tall and lean, probably in his middle 40s, with brown hair going gray at the temples and a face lined with grief and hard work. But his eyes were kind, and when he smiled in greeting, Adelaide could see he had once been quite handsome. "Xavier, you are back quick," Thomas said, then noticed Adelaide and Mrs. Matthews. "Martha, good to see you, and you have brought a guest." Xavier jumped down from the wagon and came around to help the women down. "Mr. Donovan, this is Miss Adelaide Preston. I offered her the position we discussed as housekeeper and cook. Miss Preston, this is Thomas Donovan, owner of the Triple Bar." Thomas's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he quickly schooled his features into a welcoming expression. "Miss Preston, it is a pleasure. Welcome to the Triple Bar. Please come inside. You must be tired from the journey." The interior of the ranch house was both better and worse than Adelaide had expected. The bones of it were good, solid furniture, a large kitchen with a modern stove, spacious rooms with big windows that let in plenty of light. But Mrs. Matthews had not exaggerated about the state of it. Dust coated every surface. Dishes were indeed piled in the kitchen. Laundry was heaped in corners, and there was a general air of neglect that made Adelaide's fingers itch to start cleaning. Thomas noticed her looking around and had the grace to look embarrassed. "I apologize for the mess, Miss Preston. As you can see, we desperately need your help." "It is nothing that cannot be fixed with some work," Adelaide said diplomatically. "If you could show me where I will be staying, I can put my things away and get started." Thomas led her upstairs to a small but pleasant room with a window overlooking the front of the ranch. It had a bed with a quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and even a small rocking chair in the corner. The room was dusty like everything else, but Adelaide could see it had good potential. "This was meant to be a guest room," Thomas said. "Mary always hoped we would have family visit, but—" He trailed off, and Adelaide saw the flash of pain across his face. "It is lovely," Adelaide said gently. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Please call me Thomas. We are not formal folk here. And Miss Preston, I want you to know, Xavier explained that you needed work urgently. I appreciate you coming on such short notice. I know it must have been difficult to leave town without much time to prepare." Adelaide set her carpetbag on the bed. "I appreciate the opportunity, Thomas. I promise I will work hard to earn my keep." "I do not doubt it," Thomas said. "Xavier is a good judge of character. If he vouched for you, that is enough for me. Now I will let you settle in. When you are ready, come down to the kitchen and I will show you where everything is." After he left, Adelaide took a moment to simply stand in the middle of her new room and breathe. She had done it. She had a job, a place to stay, a chance to rebuild her life. She sent up a silent prayer of thanks, then quickly unpacked her few belongings and changed into her oldest dress, the one she used for heavy cleaning. Mrs. Matthews found her in the kitchen a few minutes later, already pumping water to heat for washing dishes. The older woman smiled and rolled up her sleeves. "Let me help you get started, dear. I will be here for a few days anyway, and 2 sets of hands are better than 1. Together, they spent the rest of the morning and into the afternoon cleaning the kitchen from top to bottom. They washed every dish, scrubbed every surface, swept and mopped the floor, wiped down the windows, and organized the pantry. Adelaide was pleased to discover that the pantry was well stocked with basics, thanks to the supplies Xavier had brought back from town. While they worked, Mrs. Matthews filled her in on the ranch dynamics. The hands were all decent men, she assured Adelaide, hard workers who respected Thomas and Xavier. There had been some rough times after Mary died, when Thomas had lost himself in grief and the ranch had suffered for it, but Xavier had stepped up and kept things running. The men respected him for that, and for his fairness and skill with horses and cattle. Xavier is a good man, Mrs. Matthews said, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn pot. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but he has a kind heart. You saw that yesterday, I reckon, or you would not be here. Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. He was very kind to offer me this position, Mrs. Matthews said, giving Adelaide a knowing look. Xavier has worked here for 5 years, and in all that time, he has never brought a woman to the ranch, never even mentioned needing help until yesterday, according to Thomas. What are you implying? Just that Xavier saw something in you worth helping, maybe worth more than just a housekeeper. Mrs. Matthews smiled. But do not mind me, dear. I am just a foolish old woman who likes a good romance. Adelaide was saved from having to respond by Thomas appearing in the doorway, looking stunned. I cannot believe the change in here already. It looks like it did when Mary was alive. We are just getting started, Adelaide said. I will work on the rest of the house tomorrow, but I thought I should at least make the kitchen functional first. Speaking of which, what time do the men usually eat dinner? 6 o'clock, if that works for you. There are 8 hands plus Xavier and me, so 10 people total. We usually eat together in the dining room unless we are out on the range. Adelaide mentally calculated what she could make with what was in the pantry. It was already late afternoon, so she would need something relatively quick but filling. I can make a stew with biscuits tonight if that is all right. Tomorrow I can plan something more elaborate once I know what you all like to eat. Miss Preston, at this point, anything that is not burnt beans will be a feast. Do what you think is best. Adelaide set to work on dinner and Mrs. Matthews helped her, the two of them moving around the kitchen with increasing efficiency. Adelaide browned beef in the largest pot she could find, then added onions, carrots, potatoes, and tomatoes she found preserved in jars in the pantry. While the stew simmered, she mixed up biscuit dough, her hands remembering the recipe her mother had taught her. As 6 o'clock approached, Adelaide heard the sounds of men coming in from their work, boots on the porch, voices calling to each other, the splash of water as they cleaned up at the pump outside. She felt nervous suddenly, wondering what they would think of her, whether they would resent a woman invading their space. But when the men filed into the dining room, they were nothing but polite, removing their hats and nodding respectfully to her and Mrs. Matthews. Xavier introduced her to each one. There was Carlos, a Mexican man with a ready smile, Ben, who was barely 20 and looked at Adelaide with open curiosity, old Pete, who was probably only 40 but whose white hair and weathered face made him seem ancient, Jack and Jim, brothers who looked so alike they might have been twins, Henry, a former soldier with a scar on his face and sad eyes, and Robert and William, steady ranch hands who had been with Thomas since the beginning. They took their seats around the long table, and Adelaide served the stew and biscuits, her heart pounding as she waited for their reaction. The first bite was met with silence, and then Ben let out a groan of pleasure. "This is the best thing I have eaten in 6 months," he declared, and the other men murmured agreement, digging into their meals with enthusiasm. Adelaide felt herself relax, a smile tugging at her lips. She caught Xavier's eye across the table and he winked at her, a small gesture that made her feel warm inside. After dinner, the men praised her cooking effusively and offered to help with dishes, which Adelaide politely declined. She and Mrs. Matthews cleaned up while the men returned to the bunkhouse or the porch to smoke and play cards. Thomas retreated to his office to work on ranch accounts, and the house grew quiet. Adelaide stepped out onto the back porch for a breath of air and found Xavier there, leaning against the railing and looking out at the darkening landscape. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed impossible. "Beautiful, is it not?" Xavier said without turning around. "I have never seen anything like it," Adelaide admitted, moving to stand beside him at the railing. "In town, the buildings block most of the view. Out here, it is like the whole sky is on display." "That is one of the things I love about ranch life," Xavier said. "The space, the sky, the way you can see weather coming from miles away. It makes a man feel small, but in a good way. Reminds you that you are part of something bigger." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the colors deepen and the first stars begin to appear. Adelaide was aware of Xavier's presence beside her, the solid warmth of him, the way he smelled of leather and horses and clean sweat from a day's work. "Thank you again," Adelaide said softly, "for stopping me yesterday, for offering me this chance." Xavier turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. "You do not need to keep thanking me, Adelaide. You are earning your place here fair and square. The men have not eaten that well in months, and the kitchen looks better than I have ever seen it. You are not a charity case. You are doing a job and doing it well. Still, you took a chance on me when you had no reason to." "I had a reason," Xavier said. "I told you yesterday. I saw a woman about to give up a piece of herself because she thought that was all she had left to offer. I value all of you, Adelaide, not just the parts you think are worth selling. I wanted you to have a chance to see that for yourself." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the tears of desperation she had shed in the barber shop. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of something else she was not quite ready to name. "I should get back inside," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It has been a long day. Sleep well, Adelaide. Tomorrow is a new day." In her room that night, Adelaide lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. Somewhere an owl hooted. The wind rustled through the trees. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. It was all so different from town, where she had fallen asleep to the sounds of wagons and people and the general noise of civilization. But different did not mean bad. Different might actually mean better. She thought about Xavier, about the way he had looked at her on the porch, the intensity in his blue eyes when he said he valued all of her. She barely knew him, and yet he had already done more for her than anyone had in a very long time. He had seen her at her lowest point and had offered her not pity but respect, not charity but opportunity. Adelaide fell asleep thinking about tomorrow, about the work she would do, about the life she was beginning to build, and about the blue-eyed cowboy who had started it all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and small victories. Adelaide threw herself into her job with a determination that impressed everyone at the ranch. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, room by room, until it shone like it had not in months. She established routines for laundry and mending, for baking and cooking, for all the domestic tasks that kept a household running smoothly. Mrs. Matthews stayed for 3 days before her husband came to fetch her back to town. And before she left, she pulled Adelaide aside for a private word. "You are thriving here, dear. I can see it in your eyes. The haunted look you had in town is fading." The older woman squeezed Adelaide's hand. "And I have noticed the way Xavier looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. Just be careful with your heart, Adelaide. Cowboys can be good men, but they are often restless men." Adelaide had protested that there was nothing between her and Xavier, but Mrs. Matthews had just smiled knowingly and kissed her cheek goodbye. The truth was, Adelaide was increasingly aware of Xavier. She noticed the way he always made sure to compliment her cooking, how he helped her carry heavy water buckets without being asked, how he fixed a broken cabinet in the kitchen without making a big deal of it. She noticed how gentle he was with the horses, how fairly he treated the other men, how Thomas relied on his judgment for everything important on the ranch. And yes, she noticed how handsome he was, especially when he came in from a day's work with his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair tousled from his hat. She noticed the rare smiles he gave her, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the deepness of his voice when he wished her good morning. But she did not let herself dwell on these things. She was here to work, to rebuild her life, not to moon over the foreman like some silly girl. Xavier had been kind to her, had given her a job, and she was not going to repay that kindness by making things awkward with foolish romantic notions. Still, she could not help the way her heart sped up when he was near, or the way she found herself looking for him throughout the day. One afternoon in her 4th week at the ranch, Adelaide was in the garden behind the house, trying to revive the vegetable patch that had been neglected since Mary Donovan's death. It was hot, and she had her sleeves rolled up and a kerchief over her hair to keep the sweat out of her eyes. She was on her knees pulling weeds when a shadow fell over her. "You know, we have men who could help with this," Xavier said, and Adelaide looked up to find him standing there with 2 cups of water. "I do not mind," Adelaide said, accepting one of the cups gratefully. "I like gardening. My mother and I had a small garden when I was young, and I have missed it." Xavier crouched down beside her, looking at the neat rows she had already cleared and planted. "You have a talent for it. This looks better than it has in a year. It just needs attention and care like most things." Adelaide took a long drink of water, then set the cup aside and went back to pulling weeds. "What brings you up to the house in the middle of the afternoon?" "Needed to talk to Thomas about some business. Saw you out here working in the heat and thought you might need water." Xavier paused, pulling a few weeds himself even though he was clearly not dressed for gardening. "Adelaide, can I ask you something personal?" "I suppose so." "Do you ever regret coming here? Do you miss town?" Adelaide sat back on her heels, considering the question. "No, I do not regret it. This is the first time in months that I have felt like I have a purpose, like I am more than just a burden or a problem. As for missing town," she shrugged, "I do not have many ties there, a few acquaintances but no real friends. After my father died, people were kind, but in that distant way where they feel obligated to help but would rather not. Here, I feel like I belong to something." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Xavier said. "That is how I felt when I first came to the Triple Bar. Like I had finally found a place where I fit." "Where did you come from?" "Before Missouri, I mean." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, and Adelaide thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I grew up in Virginia. My father owned a small farm, nothing fancy, but it was home. When the war came, I was 17. Joined up with some of my friends, thought it would be an adventure." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "War is no adventure. It is just death and suffering and things no man should have to see or do. When it ended, I went back home, but everything was destroyed. My father had died, my mother had passed from illness, the farm was burned. There was nothing left for me there." "I am sorry," Adelaide said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was a long time ago," Xavier said, but she could hear the old pain in his voice. "I drifted west, did odd jobs, got into some trouble here and there. Nothing serious, but I was not exactly a model citizen. Then I met Thomas Donovan in a saloon in New Mexico Territory. I was broke, and he needed hands for a cattle drive. He gave me a chance when he had no reason to, taught me the cattle business, brought me here to Arizona. I have been trying to repay that faith ever since." Adelaide understood more now why Xavier had been so quick to help her in town. He knew what it was like to be lost and desperate, to need someone to take a chance on you. "I think you have more than repaid it," she said. "Thomas clearly trusts you with everything. He is a good man. Losing Mary nearly broke him, but he is coming back to himself. I have noticed he is smiling more since you came. Having a proper home again, good meals, someone to talk to in the evenings, it has made a difference. I am glad I can help." They worked together in comfortable silence for a while, clearing weeds and talking occasionally about small things: the weather, the ranch, the plans for the fall roundup. Adelaide was struck by how easy it was to be with Xavier, how natural it felt to work beside him and share quiet moments. When they finally went back inside, Adelaide's hands were dirty and her dress was streaked with soil, but she felt content in a way she had not in a very long time. That night at dinner, Thomas made an announcement. "We will be hosting a gathering here in 2 weeks," he said. "Some of the neighboring ranchers and their families, a few folks from town. Nothing fancy, just a meal and some socializing. Mary used to host these regularly, and I think it is time to start again." The men responded enthusiastically. Social gatherings were rare in this part of the territory, and any excuse for music and dancing and company was welcome. Adelaide felt a flutter of anxiety. "How many people are we expecting?" "Maybe 30 or 40, Thomas said. "I know it is a lot of work, Adelaide, but I will pay you extra for it, and the men can help with setup and such." "I can do it," Adelaide said, her mind already racing through menus and preparations. "It will be nice to have company." Over the next 2 weeks, Adelaide threw herself into preparations for the gathering. She cleaned parts of the house that were already clean, baked extra bread and pies, planned a menu that would feed 40 people without being too expensive or complicated. The men helped by setting up tables and benches outside, stringing up lanterns, and making sure there was plenty of firewood. Xavier found her in the kitchen the night before the gathering, kneading dough for the next day's bread. She was covered in flour and looked exhausted but determined. "You should rest," he said. "You have been working yourself to the bone." "I want everything to be perfect," Adelaide said. "This is important to Thomas, and I do not want to let him down." "You could not let anyone down if you tried. Everything you do well." Xavier moved closer, and Adelaide was suddenly very aware of how she must look, sweaty and disheveled and covered in flour. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "There are going to be a lot of men at this gathering tomorrow, single men, and you are going to draw attention." Xavier seemed to be struggling with his words, which was unusual for him. "I just want you to be careful. Some of these men, they will see a pretty woman who works hard and they will think that makes you available. I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." Adelaide felt her face flush at the compliment, buried though it was in the warning. "I can handle myself, Xavier, and I appreciate your concern, but I did not come here looking for a husband. I came here to work. I know that, I just—" Xavier trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. "Dance with me tomorrow, at least once, so the other men know you are not completely unattached." Adelaide's hands stilled in the dough. "Xavier, are you asking me to pretend we are courting?" "No, maybe. I do not know what I am asking." Xavier ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I just know that the thought of watching other men dance with you, court you, makes me want to punch something. And I am not a violent man." Adelaide's heart was beating so hard she was sure Xavier could hear it. "Why?" "Because I have been falling for you since the moment I saw you standing in that barber shop, trying so hard to be brave. Because every day you are here, you make this ranch feel more like a home. Because when I see you in the garden or hear you singing in the kitchen or watch you laugh with the men at dinner, I think about how empty my life was before you came into it." Xavier took a step closer. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I am just a cowboy with nothing to offer but hard work and an uncertain future. But Adelaide, I value everything about you, and I cannot stand by and watch you slip away without at least telling you how I feel." Adelaide could barely breathe. She had dreamed that Xavier might feel something for her, but she had never truly believed it. "Xavier, You do not have to say anything," Xavier said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Tomorrow you will have other options, better options probably, men with their own land, their own money. I just wanted you to know that I am an option too, if you want me to be." Adelaide wiped her hands on her apron, trying to gather her thoughts. She had spent weeks telling herself not to hope for this, not to read too much into Xavier's kindness. But now he was standing in front of her, his heart in his eyes, and she realized she had been lying to herself about her own feelings. "I do not want men with land or money," she said softly. "I want a man who sees me, really sees me, not just as a solution to a problem or a housekeeper or a pretty face. I want a man who values all of me, the way someone once told me everyone should be valued. Do you know anyone like that, Xavier?" A slow smile spread across Xavier's face. "I might know someone. He is a bit rough around the edges, works too hard, has a tendency to interfere in barber shop transactions. But he thinks you hung the moon, and he would do everything in his power to make you happy." "He sounds perfect," Adelaide whispered. And then Xavier was kissing her, his flower-covered hands cupping her face, and Adelaide was kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for so long. Why did you wait? I did not want you to feel pressured. You came here for work, for safety, not to have the foreman making advances. I wanted to give you time to settle in, to figure out what you wanted." "I want you," Adelaide said simply. "I have for weeks, but I was afraid to hope. I thought you were just being kind." "I am not that kind," Xavier said with a laugh. "Adelaide Preston, would you allow me to court you proper? I know we are doing this backwards, kissing before courting, but I want to do right by you." "Yes," Adelaide said, her heart soaring. "Yes, I would like that very much." They stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding each other, talking softly about everything and nothing. Xavier told her more about his past, about his dreams for the future. Adelaide shared her fears and hopes, the grief she still carried for her parents, the way she had felt herself disappearing before he found her. They talked until the dough had risen twice over and Adelaide had to punch it down again. And even then Xavier lingered, reluctant to leave. Finally, he kissed her once more, softly and sweetly, and headed back to the bunkhouse. Adelaide finished her baking in a daze, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She had come to the Triple Bar Ranch expecting nothing more than a job, a way to survive. Instead, she had found a home, a purpose, and a man who valued every part of her. The gathering the next day was a tremendous success. Neighbors arrived in wagons and on horseback, bringing their families and contributions to the meal. The women all complimented Adelaide on the food and the state of the house, and several made a point of welcoming her warmly to the community. The men tipped their hats and made polite conversation, though Adelaide noticed several of the single ones paying her particular attention. But Adelaide only had eyes for Xavier. He stayed close to her throughout the day, not possessively but protectively, making it clear without words that she was spoken for. When the music started and people began to dance in the cleared area in front of the house, Xavier claimed the first dance and most of the ones after. Dancing with him was like floating. Xavier was surprisingly graceful for such a big man, leading her confidently through the steps. Adelaide felt like everyone must be able to see how she felt about him, the way her face lit up when he smiled at her, the way she leaned into his touch. "People are staring," she whispered during a slower song. "Let them stare," Xavier said. "I am dancing with the most beautiful woman here. I would be worried if they were not staring." Thomas approached them when they finally took a break to get some punch. "So," he said with a knowing smile. "Is there something I should know about?" Xavier looked at Adelaide, a question in his eyes, and she nodded. "I have asked Adelaide to allow me to court her, sir. With your permission, of course, since she lives under your roof." "My permission," Thomas laughed. "Xavier, you two are adults, and besides, I would have to be blind not to see the way you have been looking at each other for weeks. You have my blessing, for whatever that is worth. Adelaide, you could not do better than Xavier if you tried. He is the finest man I know." "Thank you, Thomas," Adelaide said, feeling tears of happiness prick her eyes. "That means a great deal to both of us." The gathering continued late into the night, with music and dancing and laughter echoing across the ranch. Adelaide felt like she was living in a dream. Just weeks ago, she had been ready to sell her hair to survive, alone and desperate, and convinced her life held nothing but struggle. Now she was surrounded by community, doing work she loved, and being courted by a man who made her feel valued and cherished. As the last guests departed and the ranch hands cleaned up, Xavier walked Adelaide to the porch. They sat on the steps together, his arm around her shoulders, watching the stars come out. "Happy?" Xavier asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Adelaide said honestly. "A month ago I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it is just beginning." "It is just beginning," Xavier agreed. "For both of us. Adelaide, I know we have only been courting for one day, but I need you to know this is not a temporary thing for me. I am in this for the long haul, for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," Adelaide said, tilting her face up to his. "I will have you forever." Xavier kissed her under the stars, and Adelaide knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The months that followed were the happiest of Adelaide's life. She and Xavier courted properly, with walks in the evening after her work was done, quiet conversations on the porch, stolen kisses when no one was looking. The men at the ranch all knew about them and were uniformly supportive, teasing Xavier good-naturedly about finally settling down and treating Adelaide with even more respect now that she was the foreman's girl. Thomas was pleased to see them both so happy, and told Adelaide more than once that Mary would have loved seeing the house come back to life with the promise of young love. He had become like a father figure to Adelaide, offering advice and support, and she treasured the relationship they had built. As autumn came to the territory, bringing cooler temperatures and the busy work of the fall roundup, Xavier began talking seriously about the future. They were in the garden one evening, Adelaide harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost, when he broached the subject that had clearly been on his mind. "Adelaide, I have been saving my wages for years. I have a decent amount put away. Enough to start thinking about buying some land of my own, starting a small ranch." He paused, looking nervous in a way Adelaide rarely saw. "I have been thinking about a place about 10 miles west of here. It is not much, just a few hundred acres, but there is water and good grass. I talked to the owner, and he is willing to sell for a fair price." "That sounds wonderful, Xavier," Adelaide said, though she felt a pang at the thought of him leaving the Triple Bar. "I want you to come with me," Xavier said, taking her hands. "As my wife, I mean. Adelaide, I know we have not been courting long by traditional standards, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you, a home of our own, a future together. Will you marry me?" Adelaide's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. I love you so much." Xavier swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, and Adelaide felt like her heart might explode with joy. They were married a month later in the small church in Williams, with Reverend Matthews officiating and what seemed like half the territory in attendance. Adelaide wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself with fabric that Thomas had insisted on buying as a wedding present. Xavier wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, looking so handsome that Adelaide could barely focus on the Reverend's words. Mrs. Matthews cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever seen. Thomas walked Adelaide down the aisle, squeezing her hand and whispering that she had become like a daughter to him, and he could not be happier about the match. The ranch hands from the Triple Bar were all there, cleaned up and on their best behavior, grinning like fools as they watched their foreman get married. Several of the neighboring ranchers and their families attended as well, along with various townspeople who had heard the story of how Xavier had stopped Adelaide from selling her hair and offered her a job instead. After the ceremony, there was a party back at the Triple Bar that lasted well into the night. There was food and music and dancing, and Adelaide felt like she was floating through it all. Xavier barely left her side, holding her hand, introducing her as his wife with obvious pride, dancing with her over and over. When they finally retired to the small house that Xavier had been building on their new property, Adelaide was exhausted but blissfully happy. The house was not finished yet, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Xavier carried her over the threshold and they laughed together at the tradition. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wallace," Xavier said, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Wallace," Adelaide repeated, loving the sound of it. "I like that." They made love for the first time that night, tender and passionate and full of love. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking softly about their plans for the future. "I want to expand the house," Xavier said, running his fingers through Adelaide's unbound hair. "Add more rooms, build a proper barn. I want to build something lasting, something we can pass on to our children someday." "Children," Adelaide said, the word filling her with warmth. "I like the sound of that. How many do you want?" "As many as God sees fit to give us," Adelaide said. "I want a house full of love and laughter, the kind of home I had before my mother died. I want our children to feel safe and valued and loved." "They will," Xavier promised. "I will make sure of it. Just like I will make sure you know every day for the rest of your life how much I value you, all of you, not just the parts the world thinks are important." Adelaide remembered standing in the barber shop, ready to sell her hair because she thought that was all she had left to offer. She thought about how Xavier had stopped her, how he had looked at her and seen not just a desperate woman but a whole person with value and potential. He had saved her, not with charity but with respect, with opportunity, with love. "I love you, Xavier Wallace," she whispered. "I love you too, Adelaide Wallace, forever." The first year of their marriage was hard work but filled with joy. They finished building the house, adding a kitchen, 2 bedrooms and a small parlor. Xavier built a barn and corrals, bought some cattle and horses, and started building his herd. Adelaide planted a garden and fruit trees, sewed curtains for the windows, and turned their simple house into a real home. She still helped at the Triple Bar sometimes, cooking for gatherings or helping Thomas when he needed it, and Xavier still worked as foreman, though he was training one of the younger men to eventually take over his position. The 2 ranches were close enough that they could easily ride between them, and Thomas became a regular visitor, often staying for dinner and spending the evening talking with them on the porch. Adelaide discovered she was pregnant in the spring, and Xavier was so happy he picked her up and spun her around, just like he had when she agreed to marry him. He became even more protective than before, insisting she not work too hard, bringing her flowers from the meadow, talking to her belly at night about all the things he would teach their child. Their son was born in early winter, a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and Xavier's blue eyes. They named him Daniel Thomas Wallace, after Adelaide's father and Thomas Donovan, who cried when they told him. Xavier was a natural father, gentle and patient, walking the floor at night with Daniel when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his son with an expression of such love that it made Adelaide's heart ache. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Amelia Mary Wallace, named after Adelaide's mother and Mary Donovan. She was tiny and fierce, with Adelaide's auburn hair and a stubborn streak that made them both laugh. Xavier doted on her shamelessly, unable to deny her anything, while Daniel became a protective big brother who took his job very seriously. As the years passed, their ranch grew and prospered. Xavier's hard work and Adelaide's careful management turned their small operation into a success. They added more land, more cattle, hired a few hands to help with the work. The house was expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and Adelaide's garden became the envy of the county. They had 2 more children, another son named Jacob and a daughter named Rose, and their house was indeed filled with the love and laughter Adelaide had dreamed of. The children grew up knowing they were valued, not for what they could do or provide, but simply for who they were. Xavier made sure of that, telling them often how much he loved them, how proud he was of them. Thomas remained a constant presence in their lives, a beloved grandfather figure to the children. He eventually remarried, a widow from town named Susan who was kind and steady and made him happy in his later years. He kept the triple bar running until his death at 72, at which point Xavier bought the ranch from Susan, adding it to their own holdings and ensuring that the legacy Thomas and Mary had built would continue. Adelaide never forgot where she had come from, the desperate woman standing in the barber shop, ready to sell her hair because she thought that was all she had left to offer. She and Xavier made a point of helping others who found themselves in difficult circumstances, offering work, support, and most importantly, respect. They took in more than one drifter over the years, giving them a chance to prove themselves, just as Thomas had done for Xavier and Xavier had done for Adelaide. On their 20th anniversary, Xavier took Adelaide back to Williams. They walked through the town, so much more prosperous now than it had been when Adelaide was struggling to survive there. They stopped in front of the barber shop, which had changed hands twice but was still standing. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked. "Coming with me that day instead of selling your hair?" Adelaide looked at her husband, the gray just starting to show at his temples, the lines on his face earned from years of hard work and laughter and life. She thought about their children, their home, the life they had built together. "Not for a single second," she said. "You saved me that day, Xavier, not by giving me a job or money, but by seeing me as a whole person, by valuing all of me when I had forgotten how to value myself. You gave me more than I ever dreamed possible." "You gave me more," Xavier said, pulling her close. "You gave me a home, a family, a reason to be better than I was. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Adelaide Wallace." They kissed on the street in front of the barber shop, not caring who saw. 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful together. Years later, when Adelaide was an old woman with silver hair and grandchildren climbing on her lap, she would tell them the story of how their grandfather had stopped her from selling her hair all those years ago. She would tell them about his words, about how he had said he valued all of her, not just the parts she thought she could sell. She would tell them how those words had changed her life, had shown her that she was worth more than she believed, that every person had value beyond what they could provide or produce. And she would tell them that love, real love, was about seeing the whole person and choosing to value every part of them, the strong parts and the weak parts, the beautiful parts and the broken parts. Because that was what Xavier had done for her, and what she had learned to do for herself. Xavier lived to be 83 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep with Adelaide holding his hand. She mourned him deeply but without regret, knowing they had shared a love that most people only dreamed of. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the lessons she and Xavier had taught them about value and respect and love. When Adelaide died at 87, she was buried next to Xavier on a hill overlooking their ranch, the land they had built together. Their children made sure the graves were well tended, with flowers always growing around them. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but beneath Adelaide's name, her children had added an inscription that Xavier had often said to her throughout their long marriage: "I value all of you." It was a fitting tribute to a love story that had started in a barber shop with a desperate woman and a cowboy who saw past her circumstances to the person beneath. A love story that proved sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is the gift of being truly seen, truly valued, for everything they are. The ranch continued to prosper under the management of Daniel, and then his children after him. The house Adelaide had made into a home remained standing for generations, a testament to what could be built when two people came together with love and respect and determination. The story of Xavier and Adelaide became family legend, told and retold, passed down through the years as an example of what real love looked like. In the parlor of that house, above the fireplace, hung a photograph taken on Xavier and Adelaide's 50th wedding anniversary. In it, they sat together on the porch of their home, Xavier's arm around Adelaide's shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera. Adelaide's hair, still long and thick even in old age, was styled in a simple bun. Xavier's hand rested on her shoulder, a gesture of possession and protection and love that had remained constant throughout their marriage. Looking at that photograph, their descendants could see the love between them, the way they leaned into each other, the contentment on their faces. They could see two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting, something beautiful, something worth passing on. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Arizona desert, it seemed like you could still hear Adelaide's laughter echoing through the house, and Xavier's voice calling her name with all the love and devotion he had always shown her. Their story had started with a simple act of kindness, with Xavier seeing value where Adelaide had forgotten to look. But it had grown into something much larger, a testament to the power of love, respect, and the fundamental human need to be truly seen and valued for all that we are. In Williams, Arizona, the barber shop where it had all begun eventually closed down, replaced by other businesses as the town grew and changed. But old-timers still remembered the story of the girl who had almost sold her hair and the cowboy who had stopped her. They told it to their children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when someone looks at us and says, in word or deed, that we are worth more than we think. The Triple Bar Ranch and the Wallace Ranch, eventually merged into one large operation, became one of the most successful cattle operations in northern Arizona. But more than that, they became known as places where people were valued, where hard work was rewarded with respect, where those who needed a second chance could find it. It was a legacy that Xavier and Adelaide had built together, starting from that moment in the barber shop when he had seen a woman at her lowest point and chosen to offer her not charity but opportunity, not pity but respect. Their children grew up hearing their story, understanding that they came from people who had faced hardship and overcome it, who had found each other when they both needed saving, who had built something from nothing through hard work and love and unwavering faith in each other. Daniel grew up to be a rancher like his father, steady and hardworking and fair. Amelia married a doctor and moved to Flagstaff but visited often, bringing her own children to run through the same fields where she had played. Jacob took over the horse breeding operation, developing a reputation for training some of the finest working horses in the territory. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property that served the children of the hands and neighboring families. All of them carried forward the lessons their parents had taught them, about value and respect, and the importance of seeing people as whole individuals rather than just what they could provide. They treated others, the way Xavier had treated Adelaide, with kindness and dignity, and the understanding that everyone had worth beyond their circumstances. The love story of Xavier and Adelaide Wallace became more than just a family story. It became part of the fabric of Williams, Arizona, a tale that was told to show that even in the harsh environment of the frontier, even in a time and place where survival often came before sentiment, love could flourish. Real love, the kind that saw past surfaces and circumstances to the person beneath, the kind that valued all of someone, not just their useful parts. As the 20th century dawned and the Wild West became less wild, as automobiles replaced horses and electric lights replaced lanterns, the essential truth of their story remained relevant. People still needed to feel valued. They still needed to be seen as whole individuals. They still needed love that accepted all of them, flaws and strengths alike. The house on the Wallace Ranch remained standing long after both Xavier and Adelaide had passed, maintained by their descendants as a monument to what their great-great-grandparents had built. Visitors were always welcome, and those who came often remarked on the feeling of peace and love that seemed to permeate the very walls. In Adelaide's old room, the one she had first occupied when she came to work at the Triple Bar, her great-granddaughter eventually made a small museum of sorts. There was the carpet bag Adelaide had carried with all her possessions, the Bible her mother had given her, her father's pocket watch. There was the dress she had worn to marry Xavier, carefully preserved. And there was a lock of her hair, auburn still visible beneath the silver, cut after her death and kept as a reminder of what she had almost sold and what Xavier had saved her from. Groups of schoolchildren sometimes visited, learning about life in the Arizona territory, about ranching and frontier life. But they also learned about Xavier and Adelaide, about a love story that had started with an act of simple kindness and grown into something extraordinary. The docents, usually Adelaide's descendants, would tell the story with pride. They would talk about how their great-great-grandmother had been at her lowest point, ready to sell the one thing she had left of value. They would talk about how Xavier had stopped her, had offered her work instead of charity, had told her that he valued all of her. They would talk about the life they had built together, the family they had raised, the legacy they had left. And the children would listen, eyes wide, understanding in some instinctive way that they were hearing something important, something that transcended the specific time and place and spoke to universal truths about human dignity and love, and the importance of seeing each other truly. As the years rolled on and the 21st century arrived, the the story of Xavier and Adelaide remained. Their ranch continued to operate, now managed by the sixth generation of Wallaces. The land had been preserved carefully, with modern ranching practices that honored both the environment and the heritage of those who had come before. On the hill where Xavier and Adelaide were buried, their descendants gathered every year on the anniversary of their wedding. They would share a meal, tell stories, introduce new babies who would carry on the family line. They would stand by those simple gravestones and remember two people who had shown them all what it meant to truly love, to truly value another person. The inscription on Adelaide's grave, "I value all of you," had become something of a family motto. It was what they told each other in hard times, a reminder that they were loved not for what they achieved or provided, but simply for who they were. It was what they taught their children, passing down Xavier's wisdom through the generations. And sometimes, late at night when the Arizona stars blazed overhead and the wind carried the scent of sage across the desert, it seemed like Xavier and Adelaide were still there, still walking hand in hand through the land they had built together, still living out their love story that had begun with such simple words and grown into something that would last forever. Their story proved that one moment of kindness could change everything, that seeing someone's true value when they could not see it themselves was one of the greatest gifts you could give, and that love built on respect and mutual valuing of each other's whole selves was the kind that lasted beyond death itself. From a desperate moment in a barber shop to a love that spanned decades and touched generations, Xavier and Adelaide's story remained a testament to the transformative power of being truly seen and valued. It was a reminder that every person, no matter their circumstances, had worth beyond measure, and that the greatest love was the kind that recognized and honored that truth. The sun continued to rise over the Arizona desert, day after day, year after year, shining down on the land that Xavier and Adelaide had claimed and made their own. Their house still stood, their descendants still worked the land, and their love story continued to inspire all who heard it. In a world that often measured people by what they could produce or provide, their story remained a powerful counter-narrative, insisting that every person had value simply by virtue of being human, and that the truest love was the kind that saw and cherished all of someone, not just the parts they chose to show. It had started with Adelaide standing in front of a barber shop, ready to sell her hair to survive. It had continued with Xavier stopping her and saying he valued all of her. And it had grown into something beautiful, lasting, and true. A love story for the ages that would continue to echo through time as long as there were people who needed to hear that they were valued, whole and complete, exactly as they were.